Hey guys, what's up? I'm here with Atheist Jesus, and we're going to start our debate officially. I guess we'll both introduce ourselves. Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
Sure, yeah, I'll make it quick and short.
Okay.
I go by Jmike. People call me Atheist Jesus on TikTok. I didn't actually come up with that name. A lot of people think that's the case. I just was called that, and so I was like,
my bad.
No, it's perfectly fine. A lot of people are like, why do you call yourself that? And I'm like, well, everyone called me that, and I was like, well, this will work in the sake of maybe a TikTok handle or something, right? So I actually was called like Jesus Mike and stuff like that for a while, and that's why I've shortened it to J Mike. I want to be a little bit more professional than being that. I don't want to act like I'm poking fun at the other person because I actually take these conversations seriously. But I'm a programming major. Currently, I'm going to with a pursuit of a bachelor's in computational biology, which bridges kind of programming and biology together. So I'm currently taking classes in programming as well as biology with the goals to graduate, hopefully, from Georgia Tech if I can get in there. But other than that, I love talking about religion, textual criticism, philosophy. I got a show called Axioms on Trial with a co-host who is a philosophy major. We break down clips, things like that. We have quantum physicist educators kind of come on the show and break down things like that, stuff that we don't fully understand at all, but maybe they can give us some insight. And that's pretty much what we do. So you can check that out if that interests you.
Yeah, that's super cool. My Gold Talks on TikTok. I have a bunch of different like social medias if you want to find them in the comments or the description. I'm obviously like a Christian. I'm a Calvinist, and I'm super interested into religion and politics. Most important things I think we can discuss. I'm a biblical languages major here at Liberty University, hoping to go into Bible translation. So yeah. So this debate is going to be obviously Christianity versus atheism, but more specifically based on the validity of scriptures. So I guess we'll both kind of start by making our claims. I guess I'll go first since I'm the one being on the defense. My claim is that the current proto-canon for the Protestant Church is it's a valid source, it's inerrant, and it's trustworthy. And the more that you start to understand the context of the culture and the time and the space that it was written in, you start to understand how it's how valid it really is.
Okay. So is your full opening statement?
Yeah.
Okay. Hopefully mine's not too long then. I have kind of some things that I'd like to go into. And
oh no, man, go at it. Go at it.
Awesome. I'll try to read it faster, but it kind of hammers home most of my position. Tonight's topic. Sure. Yeah. Sorry. Tonight's topic will focus on the validity of the reliability in relation to biblical scripture. There are a few issues that I'll be raising. The first I'd like to go into is what we call docile reproduction or editorial fatigue. Now, I want to preface that the editorial fatigue isn't something that exploits the Bible as false on its own, but rather paints a better picture in the order in which the text comes and how it exposes various inconsistencies. So what is editorial fatigue? And this isn't entirely analogous, but I like to relate it to the scenario of a movie where you notice the actor in one scene is cleanly shaven, and then in the other scene, he's got a 5 o'clock shadow. Clearly, these are clues to give us insight to the fact that these two scenes were filmed hours, if not days apart. Editorial fatigue is similar in that we can see mistakes or contradictions that the writers of the Gospels make, or any other part of the Bible. Figure out in antiquity who was right, and then determine which of the writers weave in and out of their original source. I take a pretty common position among scholars that Mark was written first. So taking it from this perspective, we can be affirmed that there are issues within what the authors of Matthew say. For example, in Mark 6, we get a story of the beheading of John the Baptist by Herod Antipas. Historically speaking, Herod Antipas was a tetrarch, a ruler of a fourth of a territory, and this is expressed in the same story within Matthew 14 to be specific. Mark, however, details Herod as a king, which if you're privy to anything or in antiquity in this specific sense, you know that this is a false statement. He was not a king, he was a tetrarch. Matthew does something rather smart and changes this in his story to Herod the Tetrarch. Now, this is even stranger if we are to detail the differences in the motives of Herodias and Herod within the story. But what stands out the most is in Matthew 14:9, where the writers detail the king was deeply grieved. He reverts back to his source calling him a king. This is aspects of docile reproduction that we can see throughout the text. Beyond the issues with said motives and intents in regards to Herodias about Herod even grieving in the first place, this is an example of docile reproduction where Matthew has reverted back to his source. We can see another example of this when Jesus heals the man of leprosy in Mark. He details a line, "Run off and tell no one," only to be contradicted by Matthew's urge for larger crowds for Jesus to speak to. Now have detailing the same exact story in front of many people, only to forget that he keeps the line, "Run off and tell no one," which makes little sense given with what Matthew adds. Now, these alone do not dismantle the text, obviously. They just scratch the surface on why these texts aren't reliable. But given Matthew's inconsistencies with the details of the same stories, and given the consensus on Markan priority, changes to the original source remains the best explanation. Most people come to debates and they generally are going to side with what they already believe, and that is entirely understandable. You don't have to take my word for this. This is something I urge for you to do yourself. Go copy as much of the gospel as you like and compare it to the exact stories of another. Do this with the resurrection stories. Was there an earthquake in Matthew and not the others? Did the veil rip before or after Jesus died? Which women went to the tomb? Was it both the Marys? Was it Mary and Salome? Was it Joanna? Did they run off and tell no one like depicted at the end of Mark? Or did they return to the end of the tomb with Peter like in John? Now, if you do this exercise and take it a step further and try to copy your copies, see if you can avoid any major mistakes. Then copy that copy to see if it has more mistakes. You don't need to take anyone's word to use this scientific method to try this for yourself. A bigger issue in concerning the validity of the text is two-pronged. Is anecdotal testimony sufficient to believe in an extraordinary claim? And two, should the most important message of presumably all time be subjected to a methodology from an omnipotent, omniscient God where the text is manipulated? Will you mute your mic? You got a loud noise going on in the background.
Oh, my bad.
You're good. Where the text is manipulated, translated from multiple languages, subject to forgery, docile reproduction, unknown authors, allegory, metaphors, and other interpretations of the text. My opponent, I believe, is a Calvinist. My last opponent, Dr. Matt Delacroix, had a position that most Christians are just wrong in what they generally believe. So where do these differences stem? I presume the text, and I'd also presume that the text seems to be the root of these problems of interpretation. Can any anecdotal testimony about these extraordinary claims be reliable if we see major holes in antiquity, or unjustly ascertain that it hasn't been touched or manipulated when we only have 6% of 5,700 manuscripts dating before the 9th century? If someone presented you a book of claims that had answers to the fundamental nature of reality, would it be considered valid or reliable if the comparison of the 5,700 manuscripts are inconsistent, housing over 300,000 variants in text? Granted that the majority of these are minor issues, I will grant that. I'd make a guess that you might not buy into the validity of that text for any other religion. And given that our earliest manuscript is P52, which details John 18:31 through 33, 37 through 38 on the back, it dates 125 to 175 with more recent dating around 300 CE. So how can we even say vague prophecies, for example, given a perfect scenario where people can retrofit details or invoke a post hoc rationalization? I think this personally just boils down to standards of evidence. We must evaluate claims to the severity of its content. If you told me you got a puppy, I probably will just accept that claim to be true. It does not change my worldview if I find out you lied to me. Now, if you told me you got a unicorn or a flying space monkey, I am reasonably going to raise my standards of evidence because that will potentially affect the way I see the world. And if you tell me that there is a God that exists and manifests in this world, but only details that in a book for me to read, interpret, and analyze, I'm going to need more than the text itself. I'm going to need outside justification with the actual world to determine if it's true. And to sum up, let's presume a kid grew up his entire life never seeing or hearing his parents. He has been put into a position where he gets all of his information from his parents via a sticky note around the house. The sticky notes tell him what not to do, what to do, the fundamental natures of reality, who will be locked up in the basement for eternity for not following the rules, who will get to party in the attic for eternity for following the rules, how does one validate the reliability of the notes outside of the anecdotal testimony itself? Are we going to use the sticky note as evidence of the claim? Are we going to use the one sticky note that says 500 people witnessed it? To sum this up, my position is that the final nail for the unreliability of these texts are placed by the method imposed itself and hammered in by the overwhelming inconsistencies, from the poor translation of Alma and Isaiah 7:14, detailing a virgin birth, to the genealogies of Matthew and Luke. And thank you. I'm sorry if that was too long.
Yeah, I'd like to keep it point by point, but it's okay.
I typically just give a long opening statement, and then from there, dialogue's cool.
That's understood. So I actually wanted to clarify. I should have clarified this originally. I hold that the original manuscripts, the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek manuscripts, to be inerrant and infallible, not necessarily the English translation. So, but I know that you're. So yeah, I forgot what was. Maybe bring up what was your first argument?
Sure. Yeah. So docile reproduction is not necessarily an argument for the Bible's just the being wrong. It's just an aspect of the inconsistency. So the example I used was like Mark 6, Matthew 14, which details Herod being a king or a tetrarch. Now that might be a minor detail to a Christian, but from a position where you're at, where it is inerrant, how would you reconcile, say, the fact that Herod was actually a tetrarch and not a king? Because if it's, and I'm just curious on what you reconcile in terms of Mark's account versus Matthew, because they both can't be true.
So I think this is very important in journalism, right? When you go and these people aren't writing like as they're following Jesus, right? These stories are, they take account of these stories after they already happened. I think it's very important to understand this in the context of the culture where these people were going around. They were like, okay, this is important. We want to sum up all of this, like an autobiography, you get it at the end. And so they were going around and asking a lot of different people, and there are different cultural perspectives. So I think he may have seen Herod as a king. I think it's very important that you understand that the Hebrew people had a different sort of they wrote things very differently. That's why in poetry you won't get rhyming as much. You'll get parallelism because they favored metaphysics much more over physics. Today we see things more like empirical, but they saw stuff more for their meaning. So I think this very slight word change is just perspective, and again, seeing that the Gospels say things differently and have different accounts. I mean, that's something you want to see in journalism. I would be skeptical if I saw 4 different gospel accounts that all gave the same story, but just with different words. That to me, that would make me more skeptical.
Sure. But if it's coming from an inerrancy, like, and we're talking about, say, we could just use the women at the tomb, for example. If we have, say, both Marys in one, I think it's John. We have Joanna, both Marys in one, and we have Salome, both Marys. So we have a bunch of variations. Like, they all can't be true, and they all are detailing very different things. Not even just up to the detailing of who is in the tomb, and then what actually happens after that. So, for example, in Mark, the women leave and don't tell anybody at all, and that's not necessarily how it ends. But you get Mark 16:9-20, which is the end of Mark, right? That is known by most scholars as a forgery, as a add-in. And so if we're seeing that even if we're going to take that's like a gospel account and that, it's just one person's, over the other, well, then which one are we supposed to trust is kind of where I'm at, because they both can't be true. And if they're getting major details wrong, I don't see how doesn't that not undermine its reliability?
Well, I wouldn't say that undermines its reliability. When it cuts off in Mark, the women are running away. It hasn't gotten to the point where they tell anybody yet. In the other Gospels, they do go off and tell. And there are some Gospels where it highlights only one woman. But it doesn't. I don't think it says that she's alone. Well,
what does it say at the end of Mark?
At the end of Mark? Well, are you going to read the
Well, I haven't
added on. So I personally hold to the earliest manuscripts.
Yeah, and what does the earliest manuscript say?
Well, the earliest manuscripts don't include 16 9 through 20.
Yeah, and I agree. But what's right before that edition? What's the last line of Mark if we take that out? It's and that yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, and they said nothing to anyone. For they were afraid. Yeah. So
they do detail that. They do say that they didn't tell anybody, right? Okay. So they do say that they didn't go off to Galilee. They didn't tell the disciples. Whereas say John, they did, and Peter even comes back with Mary to the tomb, right?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. They did detail that, but it's important. I think it's very important. We have to understand. So if I say I didn't tell anybody this, or I didn't you have to understand. For what span of time, right? This is where it ends, right? This is where the story of Mark ends. And so the way that there's a reason why there's many different accounts. I don't think it's just to add validity, right? The whole rest of the Bible, there's only one account for the same story most of the time. But I think it's important because it's trying to tell the same story in a different way. It's trying to leave off with a different point. How it ends has a considerable difference. So I don't think that makes it errant. That's just how the author perceived the happening. I don't if I read another manuscript.
So the truth of it is independent of what they're saying then, right? Because if you're saying that's a different perspective, clearly Mark at the end, or the writers of Mark, when it says they don't tell anybody, and then in the other ones where they do, and then Jesus makes appearances to them. I think to Mary in one of them as a gardener, and she doesn't even recognize him. Those can't simultaneously be true, and it sounds like you are agreeing to that. But then if that's the case, how do you determine which one is true? If say one of them cannot be true, right? How? Because they just contradict each other. It's just impossible for both the stories to be true, and it sounds like you're admitting that. But then what's the detailing? Do we take Mark's perspective? Do we take Matthew's? And then the other ones that are inconsistent, which one do we take from there? See what I'm saying?
Well,
how do we determine that?
I wouldn't go so far as to say, okay, so and they were walking and he appeared in the county, and let me find this real quick.
Yeah, no worries. I typically have like a document with some stuff in it, but I haven't been able to find it, so I'd help you out, but I just really don't know where it is.
Having gone out, they fled from the tomb and seized some trembling and amazement, and they said nothing to know. Okay, yeah.
Yep, and Matthew 28:8, they ran. So compare that to Matthew 28:8. They ran and reported it to his disciples. Can those two be true at the same time? So they ran and told nobody, and they also ran and reported it to his disciples. Can those two statements be true at the same time?
Well, yeah. I think that I think that it's very important to just understand that these people are they're interviewing these people, and they're trying to get a story, because this isn't Mark didn't just I'm just going to go off and just write this all in one sitting. He's going around, he's asking different people, and that's how they put together these texts. So I think it's important to understand. I think it's important to understand that different people are going to tell stories differently, right? People just remember stories differently, and I understand that that's a pretty major.
So I think that's progress that we're making. So you're kind of agreeing, right? So you're saying they're going to tell different stories, and I agree to some extent. I think that's that's a fair point. I think we're on the same page there. But now with that known, now that we know that's the case, at any given time, how do I know to trust Matthew versus Mark if Mark was wrong in several instances? How am I determining who is right? Because isn't the problem that it's anecdotal in the first place?
So if you search up on are you near a computer?
Yeah. Well, I mean, okay. I have mine right in front. Yeah, I'm not using my phone.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay. So I would say search up Interlinear Bible, go to Bible Hub, and search up Mark 16. And if you scroll down and you look at the Greek word for none, I can actually send you the link right now. I'll send you the link in the private comments. Anyways, the word they use for none, in that understanding, it says none or nothing at all, but it doesn't rule out leaving no exceptions. It makes that very clear in the if you scroll down to helps word studies, it makes it very clear. And I can show you the text and where you get that from. That's
well, so and that might be the case, but I'm afraid that'd be like more non sequitur to what I'm saying, because what I'm saying is that, like, let's just take this at those two just right there, Matthew. Well, so it's 16:8 that I'm talking about. You said, what was the word you were using? Maybe I was thinking you were going into 9 through 20, and that's why I was thinking it was a non sequitur. You're talking in reference to Mark 16:8, right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Then, so I'm sorry. Now, Bridge, tell me exactly what your point is there. Sorry that I kind of derailed that.
Yeah. When you look at the Greek word, that's Strong's 3762. It makes it very clear that word isn't ruling out. It's not saying that there are no exceptions, right?
You're looking at right after and amazement and none
and to none. The word to none.
To none. Yeah. Okay. I'm looking at that.
3762.
And to none, nothing they spoke. Yeah, but wouldn't that? I mean, I think that would indicate that. That would indicate that to no one they spoke of. And especially since they're adding afterwards, they were afraid. Why would they? Like, why would they be afraid? Like, what would be the point of adding that they were afraid if it wasn't a reason for why they didn't tell anybody? You know what I mean?
Well,
what would even be the purpose of that?
Well, I mean, they weren't afraid for their entire lives, right? I mean, I'm sure it's trying to make a point by saying that they were afraid and they didn't tell anyone in the moment. But it makes it very clear. If you want to go to the top link and then copy and paste what I just sent in the chat, you'll see that you can find that in there. It's making a point that they didn't tell anyone in the moment, but I mean, they had excitement after that fear, I'm sure, going and telling it to all of their friends that it happened. Yeah, sure.
Well, and so like I get that, and I think it's important to like look at the original. I think you make a valid point with that, like 100%. I would disagree that escapes that kind of a thing, but we can also use the Greek itself to show, like, I can't remember exactly what it's Mark 14:6-5, right? Or I'm sorry, Mark 14:65. So Jesus is being ridiculed by soldiers, right? They hit him. They say, prophesy, right? Matthew 26 and Luke 22, we get the exact same 5 words in Greek. Who is it that hit you, right?
Okay.
And this goes into like the Q. I don't know if you're into Q source or Q theory. I'm somebody that believes Q source never existed. I don't think that's I think it's clearly a lot easier that Luke had a copy of Matthew, and that's the case. Well, how is it that we get these differences that, like, going back to the docile reproduction, now we're seeing Matthew changing things, like prophesy to who is it that hit you? And then the Luke, we have these major differences in terms of when we even do look at the Greek. Like, I could pick and choose that, but someone could just say, well, yeah, it's just not adding a line to it, right? But if you can do that with the Greek, like, you can kind of make it dance and do what you want it to do, I feel like. And so I don't understand. My thing is, like, now to go back to the example you give, I don't know how we get from to none to that meaning something else. Like, that's where I guess I'm like, because I feel like that would be like me. That would like be me using that example of prophesy and saying, oh, it's different here because Mark doesn't say who is it that hit you in Greek like Matthew and Luke does. But it'd be trying to make it do something I want it to do that it's not. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of how I feel like that example you're giving is like, I don't feel like it does. I don't think it escapes that because why wouldn't it just be detailed that that's the case? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I think it has to do with how the stories are told. Again, they're trying to highlight different things. So the fact that all of those shared that same words, who hit me or whatever, that's trying to highlight that specific scene. Again, parallelism is how they draw emphasis on things. So when you see that, to look at it and to really like ponder what is it trying to emphasize. If you look at the book of Mark is very much, it's very written like a very action-packed, very I guess kind of like hyperbolic, not hyperbolic, but it's very much fast paced, and it's very much trying to like emphasize things.
Sure.
And so saying they told nobody nothing, like that's trying to like, it's being very, very extreme, I guess, for a lack of better words.
Yeah. Well, I would just, so I mean, we don't have to harp on the one example throughout the whole thing of like, you know, just this one thing. We kind of move into other ones, but it's like, you know, like when we go to like who even found the tombs, or like before that even happens, like all of those details are different, right? Whether it's Salome or not. So we can say, well, they got the details wrong. They you know, it's just their story of it. That's fine. But it still leaves me with the question of who do I trust in this? You know, because now it's like, if I'm trusting Matthew, then an earthquake did happen. If I'm not trusting Matthew, then there's no detailing of it, and presumably it wasn't important enough to mention. It's like all these details make it go like, well, they all can't be true. So how am I supposed to trust that to say it's inerrant when these details are clearly contradictory?
I think you're bringing up a legitimate point, but I think it's important to understand that these people, they just read text, and they wrote text a lot differently from us. We want to know stuff very from a physical, not as much of a metaphysical understanding. They wrote their stories to get across meaning. We read stuff to get across like facts and statistics and stuff like that. That's how our Western modern culture reads things, I think. Like, we want to get stuff down to a science, but that's not what they're trying to do. They're just trying to get across general points, and every specific detail that they write is very important. So I think when they write something differently, it is even more important to look at why is it different. But I don't think that that means that we should rule it out because of that. I think we should look at it even more carefully because of that. Because again, like, these people, when they translate into the English Bible, that they're noticing this, they're seeing this, they're biblical scholars, and that doesn't mean that, oh, I should just listen because biblical scholars believe it, so I should just believe it. That's a fallacy. But,
sure.
But these people, they're going around and they're questioning a lot of people to get these stories, and the people that are writing, they're understanding that they have differences in the texts. So I don't think that rules out the story. I think
and I would think it would be a fair point, but the kind of why I do the docile reproduction thing at the opening is that that is the example of when we do see these things change. Like Mark, Matthew goes, oh crap, Mark thought, Herod was a king, like he wasn't a king, and he changes that. And so if now we know that someone is, like, even if we agree that detail doesn't really matter, and that could just be Mark's perspective, kind of how you were arguing for, which I think is a fair point, really. Maybe that's Mark's perspective on it. And that's just the detailing of that case. But if we now see that Matthew is changing that, then we can get enough, not off just that story, but off of Matthew 12, Mark 3, the parable of the sour interpretation. When we look at these kind of things, we can see that things are being changed. They're
not being changed. Well, they're just coming at it from different perspectives, because these are all written around the same time. So they're written by different people. It's not like somebody else is changing it. So I think it's very important to understand that it's written from different perspectives, and they have differences in language, but he's not changing what Mark said.
Well, but why? So then why would Matthew 14:9, if he's not using, or of the other examples, why does he revert back into his source? Because this is what we know when you copy something. If you're using a source to copy and if you're trying to change the language, like, you'll see certain clues that is what happened, as opposed to he wrote this separately. Like, you'll see the clues. Matthew is riddled with them, like 14:9, and to stick with the same example, Matthew 14:9, he goes back to the king deeply grieved. If Matthew knows that he's a tetrarch from his perspective, and isn't using Mark as a source, he wouldn't weave into the king was deeply grieved, because they're not the same thing. He wouldn't use the Greek word for king like Matthew did. I'm sorry, like Mark did. He would stick to tetrarch, especially with his knowledge that he ruled a fourth, and that there's a major difference from like a Roman tetrarch to just a king.
Well, again, I think this is actually adding on even more consistency to the book of Mark. Mark again is showing he's making strong, very like more hyperbolic statements. He's calling him a king. He's saying they told no one nothing. He's saying these very strong statements, and I think he knew that Herod was a tetrarch, specifically. I'm not exactly sure how that word king would be understood in that language, in that context, but I think that just adds more consistency to the book of Mark. And
well, the king part is a huge detail because of like a king rules it all. He is the king.
Yeah.
Tetrarch is of 4, so you wouldn't call a tetrarch a king because it wouldn't make sense, because it would be like he rules just all the land. But the entire idea of the tetrarch is the separation of those territorial powers.
Well, not in our time, in our culture, but in that time, in that culture, I think that to emphasize more his power, even beyond just, it's written more like a comic book. He's trying to put more emphasis on things. I think that it's important to understand it in light of that. It's consistent with the rest of the book of Mark, where he talks in an almost like hyperbolic sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, so if we can move to a point where we kind of extrapolate this. I think this is
okay.
some really good progress that I want to ask you if you want to ask me some questions. But I wanted to ask, like, let's kind of, I'll give the toys to play with, so to speak, where we can take some more of the pedantic kind of problems that I have out of it and look at it from the perspective of just accepting the story that's being told to you. So I'd want to know, first off, before I would straw man any position you have, like, do you align that with antiquity or historical elements? If so, potentially what might one of those be? Or do you just kind of believe it off of the faith of it? You just trust it by its word? Like, what's the kind of the methodology from you reading this and you're knowing that it is accurate, that you can trust the anecdotal testimony? What kind of separates that for you?
Yeah. So like what is my basis for believing this? And not I think when you look at I think when you just look at it and you look at the how all of these accounts, how many accounts there were, how soon after you look at the amount of accounts that happened so soon after Jesus, and you look at people like Paul, who actually lost a lot in claiming that he saw Jesus and stuff. A lot of these people, like they didn't get anything out of writing these accounts. If anything, they got persecuted for it, especially like after Jesus had left. Like they didn't get anything out of it. I think that adds a lot of validity to it. For me, and it's a lot of different accounts, unlike a lot of other what are now major religions, where they have just one author for their scriptures. Sure. And even then, when you look at these scriptures and you compare them to other ancient Near Eastern texts, it's actually fantastical how realistic they are compared to other ancient Near Eastern texts. Because right now we understand major religions today, but back then they saw their gods as they saw their kings as like gods, right, or like representations of that. Sure. And their script, they had their own scriptures, obviously, but they weren't as realistic as the Israelites. The Israelites, you look at these texts and it's not written by a bunch of high up there people. Yeah, there are some like the Psalms and such, but these prophets a lot of them are a bunch of losers when there were higher up there prophets who had a lot of power and money. And you look at it from the start, it's starting with a bunch of younger siblings, which was not something that was something to be proud of. And they talk about when Israel gets defeated, they talk again, like these prophets prophesy against their country. A lot of these countries, when they lost a battle, they would not have recorded that in their scriptures. So I think that adds a lot of validity and makes it a lot more realistic.
Okay, I appreciate that's a lot more than I would expect to kind of go off the top of your head. So I appreciate that. But I'd start with the kind of the Paul thing. So the first thing I guess I would say would be, if we see these kind of details, so you said there's like there probably wouldn't be a reason that they would do this. They're going to be persecuted for this. Essentially, what you said, like they have backlash, right? That's fair to say. Kind of sum up what you're saying there is that they would have backlash for these beliefs. So if that's the case, right? And I had somebody, or let's take somebody who's probably your most trusted source that whether it be your wife, your roommate, or whatever. I don't know if you're married. Presumably not, but whatever your most your most trusted source is. If they told you that they saw the risen Tupac or the risen Elvis, right, and they give you this testimony, they have a lot to lose in that statement, right? They have a lot. They could lose a lot, like a lot of social aspects, their job, perhaps, how everybody just looks at them in general. They have a lot to lose with statements like that coming out publicly. But you probably wouldn't trust your spouse, right, that told you she was abducted by aliens or that she saw the risen Tupac or the risen Elvis, right? You probably would you believe her account on that?
No, but I think it adds to it a lot that there are multiple of these people that are agreeing with each other all on this stuff, and they're all losing out on it.
Sure, but do you know any of them? Like, do you know Paul at all?
Well, no, I don't know Aristotle either, but I'm sure he has some valid philosophies.
Not in regards to physics, but so if you're going to say like that you trust Paul and all these other people that cooperate with each other, but you don't trust your wife, what if she or the person that you would trust the most about this claim? Like, what if they cooperated with other people and multiple people told you, no, I saw it too, it happened, right? Tupac did rise we watched him come out of his grave and he rose. Like, are you gonna believe it?
Well, my first thing is, that would be hard for me to believe, because I'm pretty sure Tupac is alive in the divinity. I'm just kidding. Yeah. Anyways, I think that if there were people who, I think it's important. Paul was a very devout Jew, so he was making a full 180 from his claim that he stood by so much that he was willing to kill people who disagreed with him. So I think that Tupac rising from the dead doesn't have as much implications for my wife claiming she saw it as Jesus claiming that he saw Jesus rise from the dead.
Absolutely fair enough. No, absolutely fair enough. Now I'd like to take it a little further. We have people of religions, Islam in particular, that strap bombs to their chests and fly into buildings and do sincerely believe these things, especially the things that they're going to get when they die. So you would agree that Paul's willing to risk this and his sincerity of the belief does not indicate that the belief is necessarily true, the same way in Islam doing the exact same kind of thing, a Muslim doing the exact same kind of thing doesn't indicate the validity of their religion, right? Like those parallels are pretty accurate to compare, correct?
I wouldn't say so. I mean, Paul claimed that he saw. I mean, I don't think many of those Muslims would claim that they saw Muhammad himself, and I'm sure that
has nobody ever claimed to have seen a god and do something because of the god or the demon. Like, has nobody sincerely believed something that they were told either in their head or by something maybe that they thought was a god and then committed the act? Has that never happened?
Well, Paul didn't claim that, he heard God in his head, right? He physically got blinded when he saw this great light and he heard God. And so,
but isn't that still, sorry to cut you off, but isn't that still a claim? Isn't that still a claim?
That is a claim, but he's saying that he saw it himself. These Muslims are saying that what has been passed on to them, texts that have been passed on to them are true. And Muslims don't believe that, or I'm so sorry if I'm offending a Muslim, but I don't think
we can use a different example if you want.
Okay.
So that we can be a little bit more sensitive.
I think it's hard to find an analogy. Very hard.
I don't think so. I think that everything works in this case because what you're doing is it's very similar to the 500 witnesses claim, where it's one claim, but someone's adding more to it, saying, "Well, it's 500." No. Because essentially what you could do is say he could do the Dr. Evil. There are 1 million people saw it. Like, you can do that with the claim the same way Paul can claim that I saw him, but that the claim, the the claim itself, no matter what the claim is, doesn't add validity. You need the evidence. So like if I'm going to say I saw that, like you wouldn't believe me, even though I'm using the exact same method or the exact same kind of principles that Paul is relying on, right? So, you would have to admit that he could potentially be wrong in what he believed, right? Or is that not a possibility?
Well, so I think it's a little bit, it's harder. I'm not using the 500 really as much. I would say that would be a lot more valid back then, because the literacy rate was, I think, about 25%. So people pass stuff down orally, even like the Torah. So that's how only so many people could write. But today, I mean, you just look at the 5 people and they all agree, right?
Yeah, but couldn't anybody, like, it wouldn't matter about culture. Like anybody could write down 500 people, right? Like anybody could do that, correct? We could all do that.
That's true.
Yeah. So how does that on its own stand as valid? Like, wouldn't you want to inquire for more to substantiate the claim, since it's only a claim and not evidence of the claim?
Well, it's not just a claim, right? It's a claim that's getting them in big trouble, that's getting them crucified upside down, that's getting them stoned to death, that's getting them thrown in an iron bull and burned to death. And they're all making the claim together. They're not getting anything out of it. If anything, they're getting persecuted. And then I don't know. And if the 500 people didn't see it, then how is Christianity so big today?
So that would be an ad populum fallacy, though, because then why is Islam as big as it is, right? It's actually bigger, I believe, than or maybe it's faster growing. I could be conflating.
It's faster growing, but it's not as big.
It's probably not as big, but even because, like, so I don't want to get off the rails here, but if that's the case and there's more, that argument doesn't work in the favor, because majority of the world does not believe in that, meaning God failed at his message. Just showing and highlighting the fact that we're putting this into text, the same methodology that other religions are using for their claims, and they can line it up with antiquity and say, something happened, because like we can get things right in the details, right? Like we could have a story, a big explosion happened and it blew up me and you. I don't know, where you live, but it blew up the whole East Coast. I know we live on the East Coast. The person writing the story about this, right? The explosion, like they could write, that Mike was in Atlanta and you were in the location you were, and Mike Mike ate food and then drank some water right before they had this, and he could get all these details right, but that would never lend to the credibility of his claim that there was a giant explosion, because that is entirely independent of all these other details that you're bringing in. So I wouldn't. My thing is I wouldn't be able to lend credit to like these detailings of that, because they are just the claim. Like every bit of these claims need the independent source. So if you say 500 witnesses, you need 500 testimonies, not one testimony of 500 people. Because like the miracle of Fatima, for example, was 30,000 people thought they saw the sun move from the sky, and all 30,000 people were wrong. So we know that the amount of people doesn't make it any difference to the claim as well.
So that's 5 people that are all saying that are 500. And again, 25% literacy rate about then. And then we also have extra biblical sources. Like I'm sure you've heard of the Jew named Josephus who talks about this Jesus. He's heard about, I'm pretty sure he lived after Jesus, but still he heard about it from these.
Yeah, it was like 100 years or like 90 years after, I think.
Yeah. It's a bit of time after, but still, I think, 5 people claiming about 500 people seeing it. That's not the most. That's not going to, like, I guess it's not going to make or break it for me, but it certainly does say something for it. And again, these are people that are having their lives put on the line, and it's all agreeing. I can't exactly remember what your analogy was for Islam growing. Why Islam grew? Muhammad, he was what do you call it? He was moving around a lot. That's how Islam spread so much, is because the Muslim people moved around a lot. And Muhammad, I don't think people claim that they saw him in the caves with an angel writing stuff down. I'm pretty sure that a spiritual being did tell him to write it down. I personally don't think that it was a good spiritual being. I think Paul actually prophesied about it, saying that if you hear another gospel taught to you by an angel, then don't believe it. So I think that. But I he moved around, and so there's a reason why he had a large following. But I don't think his followers claimed, even his originals, to have seen it and wrote it down. And also, the Quran was only written by one person.
Well, so we can even use a more modern example. We like, okay. Do you know who Satya Sai Baba is?
No, I don't actually.
So Satya Sai Baba was a Indian. I think he's an Indian guru. Like, he claimed to be born of a virgin. Claimed to was gonna. I think he even claimed he was gonna like rise on the third day. Like, he parallels a lot of Christianity and Zoroastrianism and a bunch of other kind of religions put into one. He was a modern day claimed messiah. Had, I think, hundreds of thousands of followers. Right? Mm-hmm. They all risked people have been risking their lives for him. I think in one instance, he did his own heart surgery, and someone like risked their own, bodily autonomy for him, I believe. I could be wrong on that detail, but we have examples of people that were willing to sacrifice things to this guy. Does any of those things that parallel make Satya Sai Baba a true God?
Well, but it's
just a claim, right? Wouldn't you
want thousands
of
people claim to see him resurrect though?
I don't know his resurrection thing. That's part of the one that I'm not even sure if he claimed that. I do know that he claimed he was born of a virgin, and that people claimed that he was, a god. But regardless, my point being that people are going to make claims and they're going to believe it, but they can still be wrong, right? Like they could be wrong based off of the claim. You have to have the actual evidence, and if the evidence for it says so in this book, then we now need to go all the way back and go, well, what's when did we get these texts? Well, the earliest one we have dates from anywhere from 125 CE, more recently to 300 CE being P52. So it's like, how do we even know that
50 to 100 AD?
No. The newer testings are at 300 now, but it was 125. But nothing. There's this is a scholarly consensus among all scholars. Nothing dates before the 1st century. We don't have it. Doesn't exist.
Oh, copies. There were copies. That we found.
We don't have those. We don't have those originals. Mm-hmm. They're even pushing back on when they were written, like John in the 90s. I know fundamental Christians that believe John was written in the 90s.
I mean, even then, I mean, compare that to Homer, Herodotus. I cannot say these names. I'm so sorry. Thucydides, Plato. These hundreds of years afterwards, and then even when you look at this, like. This guy made claims, but nobody did. These thousands of people claim to see his virgin birth firsthand. Did these people claim to see his resurrection, his Kool-Aid magic juice power firsthand?
Let's say that they did. Then all they have is a claim that they saw it. They still need the evidence. Everybody can claim to have saw it. This is the same problem with the Bible, though, is that we only have the claims. We don't have the evidence.
Claims of firsthand, which is completely different.
But this goes back to if your wife or someone you trust claims that they saw the risen Elvis and Tupac, that you discredit that firsthand experience.
But people don't do that.
But listen. But why do you discredit it? Because it's probably because why
just
would
one
you
source? If it's just one source, I'd discredit that pretty easily.
But
if it was my wife, that would be pretty hard. But
if it was multiple just anecdotal sources without any evidence of the Tupac raising or whatever the predicament is. Are you going to accept it just off of ad populum?
Is it consistent with? I mean, this isn't just one claim, right? And this isn't just one story, right? Look at the Bible. I don't know.
How do we know?
The scriptures. It's many different stories that all align with each other. It's not just one claim. And on top of it, the fact that you have to bring up analogies, right? Because we have nothing like this. We have nothing like this where people get stuff firsthand and together they make similar claims. We don't have anything like that today, and that's why we have to make analogies, because nothing today is anything like this book.
But I would disagree full-heartedly. So there's nothing like this book in terms of it's probably the most attested thing that we have in history in terms of an ancient story. 5,700 manuscripts, absolutely crazy that that's the case. I agree, but it's actually a problem for Christianity, because that is the case. We have so many differences between the 5,700. Like John Mill Stewart, I believe, or John Mill, not John Stuart Mill, that's a philosopher. John Mill, in the 1700s, just had only 100 of the manuscripts and put together what's called the Novum Testamum, I believe. and cited 30,000 just differences and changes that he noticed just in 100. We're now up to, there are more variants than there are words in the manuscripts than there are words in the Bible itself. And so we can't say that it's we can't use the example and say there's nothing like this, because that's actually the opposite. There's nothing like this on the unreliability side of it. It's more unreliable because of how many differences there are. It's like, well, what do we go off of? And do we have the originals to compare it to? And then once we do, now we're going to see after the 9th century, which is 94% of the 5,700 manuscripts come after the 9th century. They're hundreds of years removed. How are we going to attest that that's even the case at that point? Like, I don't see how that lends credit. That to me makes it less reliable. I would feel.
I'm kind of iffy about your claims about the changes. Maybe you could send me a source on that later, and I could look into that.
You can actually just look at it yourself. You can look at the Bible and just compare it yourself. Just do a horizontal comparison of the Gospels or anything else. You can see it for yourself.
Oh, he's not talking about translation. He's talking about.
You can do translation too, but you can do this in any aspect.
Well, I'm
like Alma and Isaiah 7:14, right? Like that prophecy fails because it wasn't actually a virgin birth. Alma does not mean that. It means a woman of childbearing age, and they didn't understand that. And so that they made a false prophecy of a virgin birth based off something that had nothing to do. And even scholars now even agree. I'm not trying to appeal to authority, but this is a consensus of scholars. That
Isaiah 7:14, you said?
Yeah, all the word Alma means child of bearing age, and scholars agree it has nothing to do with virginity at all. Just a young woman of childbearing age is what it means. Sorry to go off on a tangent, rabbit hole there, but I use that as an example that it's like
a virgin.
We see this even in the Old Testament or the New Testament. It's kind of riddled with them.
A girl made. Oh, Alma, virgin.
The original Hebrew, right? I believe.
Yeah. I'm seeing noun, feminine, young woman, ripe, sexually, made, newly married.
Yep, child of childbearing age. And so there's nothing about
young woman or.
And so that now the entire prophecy about the virgin birth stems from just a poor understanding, because you even admitted earlier that these you used the words that they were kind of like losers, right? And they kind of like that is
they were losers.
And that's something that is to me why I think it's fascinating that this religion is, because it wasn't of like the royal, right? It wasn't of like the hierarchy. It was like the common man kind of thing. And I value and I respect that. I respect the scripture and stuff like that immensely. I really do. I think there's lots of great things in there to take out of it. No problems with really Jesus and any of those kind of things in that regard. But when we look at it, it's like the very beginning of it is like the prophecy, the most important prophecies, just due to a mistranslation of language.
So that translation, was that translation to a different language? Was that the Septuagint, the Vulgate?
I think that's a good question. I don't feel comfortable fully committing to an answer on that, but
again, so I think I would need more time to look at this on my own time. But I think again, myself, as most Orthodox Christians across, I'm pretty sure most Orthodox Christians would hold to the claim, or educated Orthodox Christians hold to the claim that the original manuscripts are the ones that are infallible. Again, if you look at the process that these people went through translating and copying these messages,
when you say
original process,
when you say originals, what in what reference to the
scriptures, just the scriptures in general?
But do we have the originals?
Well, like the earliest manuscripts, I guess is what I'm trying to say, right?
Okay.
Yeah. When you look at like the Qumran caves, what are they called? The Dead Sea Scrolls, right? I mean, it wasn't just one person copying it. They'd have one person copy it, and then they hand it over to the next scholar, and he reads through and double checks them, and then they over to the third, and they write in extra. Like you'll see, it's a little bit messy because they'll add in text just above like a line, because the first line this first scholar forgot to write something, stuff like that. I mean, it's a very thorough process.
Paraplesis or something. There's like a term for that
I've heard about. All these terms. I'm sorry.
No, I've just heard about them like in debates, and then people talk about them, and I'm like, oh, I got to remember that terminology for it because I've just been saying a long sentence for that, but you boiled it down into one word, you know.
Hey man, I have respect for that. That's
lexicon and like jargon, nomenclature, all that kind of stuff. I find it very important just because it's like people don't talk past each other. But but yeah, I mean, so I know we kind of went on a tangent there. Did you want to kind of? I felt like I put the spotlight on you a lot there. Do you want to kind of throw it back on me or anything in that regard, or how would you take it kind of from here from that perspective?
To be honest, I wasn't sure that we would have this, so I'm not prepared. I did not prepare, and this is. To be honest, this is my first time formally debating an atheist. So I know that's a lousy, but I just didn't really know what to expect. So
no worries. I'm not really sorry if the opening statement threw you up. I've been doing so like on my channel. I have like some guys with like PhDs in New Testament studies come in, and sometimes we don't do the whole opening statement. But when someone does like a formal debate, I always kind of go under the assumption there's a 10-minute opening statement. So I apologize if I bored you or your audience with that whole opening, but
I don't apologize for being more prepared than me. I mean, if you're going to show me how it's done, I mean, shoot, well, I'll take notes for next time.
Well, I wrote it like this morning cause I've been so busy with school, but it's just the stuff's in my head. It's more so I can't organize my thoughts very well unless I put it down. You know what I mean? It's just kind of how I work. And so it's like, it just kind of helps me get off the, I guess off from the start. I would say, but yeah, I mean, so I think there's a lot of progress in the conversation. So and I really do actually appreciate you. If you said this is your first time, I mean, if this is your first time, I mean, just imagine where you'll be when you are doing these kind of things regularly, and that's impressive. So I give you major kudos for that.
Thanks.
But I guess I would want to, we could boil this down. I don't know how long you want this to go for, but
maybe like 15, 30 more minutes. Does that sound reasonable to you?
Perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
I would ask, let me try to, I guess, phrase this in a better way. If we are taking it from the perspective of you're kind of corroborating things that not just this person said it, so therefore I believe it. Obviously, you have these kind of cumulative probably case, so probably more so it'd be accurate to say, I think. Like, what would you present to me as from your basis that you would think could get, that would say these are reliable and here's why? Like, what would be like kind of the number one thing that would make you say these are reliable, or that kind of puts the nail in the coffin, so to speak?
Yeah. I think, like I said, just how distinct these are. When you look at modern religions, they have like these texts written by like one person. These are written by a lot of people throughout a long history of time. And even when you compare these historically to a bunch of other different, you compare it to a bunch of other different religions, ancient Near Eastern religions, these people would just write whatever sounded like that. They were super biased. They would write, "Oh, hey, look, we like the Syrians. Hey, we won this war against Israel. Israel had prophets who would speak out against Israel. They would speak out against that, and that sticks out. It's very realistic. It's not just saying, "Oh, hey, by the way, we won this war, and just completely skip out on the other stuff." I think that really makes it. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's one of my most major reasons for believing it.
Okay. And you mentioned it was inerrant, kind of in your opening statement. And I know I've kind of used the gospel a lot. And I understand you say, well, these things can be different because of the accounts on that sense. But if I use a more specific example, kind of the inconsistency, like we could look at like Judas Iscariot, the field of blood, right? So in Acts, we have Judas buying the field. And then in Matthew 27:7, we have the chief priest buys the field. And we also get the subsequent in Matthew.
In Matthew what? You get the chief priest buying it?
27:7, and I think Judas hangs himself 27:5 right before it.
27.
and then compare that to Acts 1:18, which I'll put in the comments, and maybe we can spend the last bit of the time just to kind of look at Acts and Matthew.
Does going till exactly 2:15 sound good?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. 2:15. Oh yeah, that's perfect.
Okay. And then I was thinking, I know it can be hard to like kind of like end it when we're both trying to say stuff. So I think if we haven't already come to a stopping point by then, we could just 2 hours talking just exactly then. That person has to stop talking.
Sure.
Does that sound okay? Perfect. Good.
Yeah, I don't really care if I get a last word thing in. My closing statements are just kind of like,
me neither.
Watched it again, and that's my closing statement. You know, like that's all I said. Just this is my closing statement.
Oh, me too. I'm just making sure. Last debate, somebody wanted to preach a little bit, so
I don't know if you guys hear that, but I apologize. I'm gonna mute my mic. There's a testing center next to me. Like when there's an emergency that happens, and it just blasts over like this is a test, and it's really loud. So I apologize if you can hear that. I swear it's not the voice of God behind me. Oh, and here comes.
Oh, you got disproven in your own debate.
Yeah, and the siren's going. So I'm gonna mute my mic because the siren's gonna go for a minute. But I'm gonna put in the comments Acts 1:18 and then Matthew 27:7.
Okay.
Is that coming through? Oh, it's gone now. Okay, cool.
Very lightly.
Now all the dogs in my neighborhood are going to be barking.
Hey, I'm people in my. I mean, we have a game today, and it's supposed to be super close. So I'm surprised it's not people running down the hall screaming. So
yeah, that's right. It's Saturday.
Okay. Yeah. Ownership transfers from buyer to seller. Okay. Yeah.
And then there's two kind of parts of it. The buying of the field. Actually, I would say there's more than that. So there's who buys whether it's not the 30 pieces of. Okay, so there's three things that I would say. Before that, in Matthew 26, this is kind of less important. You have like basically it's weighted out 30 pieces of gold for to give to Judas, the chief priests. In a sense of antiquity, there was no pieces of silver used in the currency at Jesus's time. They had gone out of circulation 300 years before that, and so they actually used minted coins. But to get to the comparison, if you look at the 27:7, where the chief priest buys the field, and Acts 1:18, Judas buys the field, you get the same thing in Acts 1:18 that Judas's insides burst out, like he falls over, and I guess like his entrails spill out onto the field. But in Matthew 27:5, he hangs himself. Those are like huge, huge differences. And if you say it's an errand, I'm wondering how you reconcile those kind of things.
So about the fields, the word they use in Acts is acquire or win. It can also be translated purchase or buy. I'm sending you I just put that in the public comments. Okay, I put it in the public comments.
Cool.
The link to that word. I just put it in the private, but it can be translated as a purchase or buy, or it can also be acquire or win. As for having fallen over, so I guess and then that goes across with Matthew 27:8, I guess, or when does he hang himself?
27:5. Yeah, it's right before. I thought it was after as well, but it's right. It's right before. He threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed, and went and hanged himself. That's I think that's New King James. I don't know why I have that listed up. I typically try not to go off the King James, but
I don't.
It's just harder for me to understand what's going on.
It's not even as good as the interlinear, anyways. Overrated.
And throwing down his pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and hanged himself. And then in Acts 1:18, now this man purchased a field. Oh, I'm in James again. Let me go to the right translation. ESV. Now this man acquired a field with the reward of his wickedness, and falling headlong, he burst open in the middle, and all his bowels gushed out. So he either fell down in the field of blood, and his bowels gushed out, or he hung himself. But they both can't be true. You as somebody who's a Christian, do you think that they're both talking about the same thing, or do you accept one over the other? And then if you accept one of the over the other, I think that would be like an admittance that you think it does have errancy at some aspects of it. So I would assume you're probably going to say that they're probably the same story and not contradictory, but that's kind of what I'd be most interested in. And I know you probably don't have an answer now. Mm-hmm. You're just kind of going off an educated guess now, but maybe if we have another conversation in the future, we can kind of go over these more as you've looked into them, because I don't expect you to just know these. I think it's unfair for me to expect that.
It's kind of my fault for not doing research.
Well, no, the Bible is, how big is this, dude? This book is really big. I do not expect you to know everything in here. I love textual criticism, and I probably should know a good chunk of it, but I'm still like Matthew 20 something. So it's no issues there. Plus, from my perspective, there's a lot of kind of examples I could list that I wouldn't expect you to know all of those.
Okay. All right. So I just real quick searched up commentary on this verse. The word that they use for falling headlong is actually means to be bent forward. So the way that this particular commentary is explaining it is, of course, when you hang yourself. I don't know a whole lot about hanging myself. Never done it. It like doesn't it like crack your neck or something? It's trying to like say that.
Yeah. So and I've heard that as well.
He fell forward. I guess that's how this explains it.
But what his guts burst out? If you got hung, do people's bowels burst out? That's what it says. It says his bowel, because I agree. So I have a friend. I don't know if you know Pastor John on TikTok. Brought by Blood 316, but he's a pretty good friend of mine, and he makes the apologetic that the being bent forward is indicative of being hung. But there's two problems with that. If you fall, because his thing is that he got hung, died, the rope snaps, and then he falls and his entrails burst out. There's two problems with that. One, if you fall and you're hung, you're going to fall feet first. You're not going to fall head first. That's just gravity. Two, you're going to your insides aren't going to burst out unless there's like a rod of metal sticking out, and then it like pierces you on your way down. But if you do that, now you're just reconciling something and showing that you can reconcile anything you want. You can just make things. Oh, well, there was this, there was that, and that explains it. But that's not what's detailed. And so it's like, how are we going to incorporate more details that the gospel or the books don't say? Because from my vantage point, you're now creating your own Bible when you do that. You're creating your own gospel. You're not actually doing what God in this case would want you to do, which is look at the words of the Bible. But that's my perspective of that. And I'd love to hear your perspective of that once you do more research on it.
Yeah. It says, so this commentary that I'm reading, again, this is like one of the first I came across.
Sure.
It says, this can easily be supposed if he threw himself from a rock or an elevated place. He first hung himself, and then fell and was burst asunder. I could kind of see.
Doesn't that feel forced, though? Doesn't it feel like you're just making it work? Like, rather than actually reading what's there, you're coming up with something that makes it make sense?
I think, I could see how you could say that. But at the same time, I think it's harder to say with these texts from this time where people didn't focus as much on putting details into stuff like we have today, where when people write, they put in a whole bunch of detail. So I think that I don't know. I would have to really like look into the words and stuff. So I guess that's just what this commentary is saying. I guess I'd have to look more into the commentary itself as well.
Well, and that's something I would want to highlight when you do this. I would say keep in the back of your head, or just have the little me on your shoulder, the little atheist, devil guy, as opposed to the angel guy there, right?
Be skeptical.
Well, not even be skeptical. Think about if you're reconciling a story, does it say what you are making the text say? Or are you making the text say that? And I think that's a very important thing to remember when you do these kind of things.
Well, I think when you ask how the text contradicts itself in a language that's very different from the language that it was written in, it's important to understand that there's quite a bit of language barrier between.
Sure.
That's kind of sounds like a lousy excuse.
No, it's actually good. I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's a fair point to make. I just think it highlights the God's message being a horrible method, that he should know as an omniscient being that this would happen. He would know that people are going to have these translation issues. That people are going to have, well, we have to look at this, we have to look at that. Do people that want to believe in this really have to go through all this trouble to believe in this? Like, did he really feel that was the best method? And then also in comparison to that, now all the other religions that rival his all the other God hypotheses use the same methodology, the same type of, it's written down is what I'm saying. It's not told to us directly where we just know. You have to just believe this thing that's what humans made, which is writing and language and books and things like that.
I mean, it is told to us directly through texts. I think God acts so much that it's become natural. I think it would be irrational if we did believe in a God to say that this God is immoral, seeing as if we're going to be consistent with the Christian worldview, we are a bunch of dust put together that got breathed into, and I don't think we have the same level of intellect to question an all-powerful being that has all the knowledge in the world.
Doesn't that sound totalitarian though? Like what's the difference between that and someone in North Korea with their leader saying we shouldn't question the leader? Like we're dust, we're but nothing, we're rags, we're filthy rags. Doesn't that more so feel like you are subject to something you were born into without your will, and the God has decided that this place looks awesome and what a wonderful universe. There needs to be people here so that they can worship me and tell me how awesome I am. Because that's the perspective of it that I see.
That's not the original intention. If you go back to the very first page of the Bible, you see God making us to actually rule with him. He gives us dominion over the earth. He says, subdue the earth and cultivate it.
But he knew that it wouldn't happen, right? He knew that we'd fail with that.
Yeah, and then because of that
wasn't his intent.
Well, it was his original intent. He just knew that we would mess it up. And so his intent didn't fail, we failed. And so he actually makes it even better. He even expresses his goodness through sending his perfect son down to live and die for us and come back to life to show his great love for us. So I think that adds on even more.
I would say it takes away, because what you have now is a God that's going to he created us. So if we are going to make a mistake, he's the one who created us. He gave us every bit of the conditions necessary for us to mess up. He's responsible for that. We mess up, and then he goes, let me double down and send myself as myself to save everybody from me, from what I will do to you if you don't believe, or what I will do to you if you. It's like as if you created AI, right? And then you gave it free will and you gave it this ability to do things, and it goes, and the first thing it does is burn down your house. And you go, oh, I'm going to punish every other AI that comes after you. It's like, well, it wasn't its fault. It's like baking a lasagna and the lasagna comes out burnt and you get mad at the lasagna. It's like you were the one that created it. You're the one that made it.
Well, you're sinful too, right? I mean, we're all sinful.
I don't believe in sin. So I believe that I'm a moral realist. I believe there's good and bad, but I don't believe in sin.
Well, okay, if we were to be consistent with the Christian worldview, then we believe that everyone sins, so therefore everyone does deserve to.
Because he made us to sin, because he created the conditions necessary so that we are born of sin.
Well,
he was ultimately responsible to make a universe where that wouldn't be the case. We don't have that. He's serving tennis. He could create that. We're waiting for the serve. We have no aspect of being able to change that. I mean, did you ask to be born? Did you sincerely go, I would love to live, or did it just happen?
Well, either way, who am I to challenge a God who is all powerful, who created the very aspect, the very thing of goodness?
Sure.
If he created that thing, what rational I think we should discuss this in the waiting room because we have like
sure.
Left. I'd love to discuss this in the.
So yeah, I would just say that the baby, if it's all good, then that means by proxy killing babies in 1 Samuel 15 means that that's good, and I don't think that that's a good way to evaluate a God. Even if it did exist, I don't think that's a God worth worshiping.
Well, let's end this debate real quick, and then I actually.
Oh yeah, we are at 2:14. You're right. Sorry.
Okay.
I didn't realize that.
All good, man. Okay. Yeah. It was nice talking to you. Good debate.